double vehicular.
Oh, like what?
Yeah, it was brutal. You there? I couldn't even look at who was over there. I was like, yeah.
Hey, you don't have anything next week, do you?
Do you? No, I've like cleared like 3 weeks. I've been trying to travel. The hockey season started, so I try to leave on Friday and into Minnesota. Come back Sunday or Monday.
Hey, you're gonna want to hit Minnesota this time of year.
I was just there. I made it last week. I was there so kid played Saturday night. Went to the Browns game at noon. And then he played at the South Center where the Wild plays at 5. So I went noon and 5. It was a guy's dream. My wife went too, but she went to Mall of America in between there. So
she went shopping.
She did all right. Probably should be back there before you start, right?
People that tell me to do things and then things happen.
I sense.
Did you hear about that? Oh, that's my music. Oh, my fault. No, it's not. It was the
Unless you're running late and then they will start on time. I think it's like search on my
And for one of the other guys. Two more that
Have you guys got any? Comments telling me guys that we're leaving the same time. If anything, it'll be the weekend shift and not the weekend shift. So I've always thought about that. If you go to jail, I mean, but it just what I do, I don't know, because I was wondering.
More of a gamble. They're trying to do something like start. I worked with Kevin, the other one you got there, like an influencer guy.
You know what I was talking about her today? She it's just her looking at
Another one, block. It's funny, I only worked for her once. That was all out. I mean, it's inferred. You should be there. Certainly it is.
I know.
I know. kind of really came out.
Trial is
You know what, it ain't bad. Being boiled ain't bad.
I know, I remember when you first started. You and Judge Donnelly started together.
First of all, it's justice.
The justice on, right, excuse me.
Yeah.
Like I said, tell them I remember when you had both you guys together.
It's hard to recognize you over the phone.
Yeah.
Oh, it's enabled.
Yeah. It's a lot more.
Hey, you.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Good to see you.
I don't know, well, that was about your time. Judges usually just bring the bed, grab the book from the floor up where the judges, look at the right their order, sign it, you say that, take it back down, take it up. You can go from the order back to the judges, and every person.
Parallel park, and I finished. This couple was walking past me, and they applauded me. I was like, you know what, that made my day. Thank you. First, that parallel park.
Oh, they used to. Certainly not my first one. I was like, well, I didn't know. And Keith was on the other side. So he only likes Welcome to
I wasn't here. You guys got that.
Yeah, it doesn't say, I'm not there for the Supreme Court. After electrical, even being after themselves. We sort of, I guess that's more. What's that?
Actually, we went on like 5 years in a year, and I was like, that's not a great thing to tell a group full of people who have many single families. Like, maybe I should go out and get
Yes. Oh, nice to see you. How are you? You know it. That has not come in. It's right around the corner.
I've seen it before, too, recently. You got a chance with it.
That's what I agree. Once you slide down there.
Kevin, I think, do you guys have an extra phone?
I don't have an extra one. No.
That's, I'm
Trying to do it?
trying to remember. She's only 3 years anyway.
Is this not a pop glasses?
Yeah, that's, she told me. She wears glasses.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I saw you looking at it. What's the deal?
No, I figured. Right. So they don't fall.
They can take them off. I don't need them. Except the rear, except the rear. Cataract surgery took care of that.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. My husband had it. His readers read it on text. But he can see far.
Oh, yeah, 2020.
Yeah, great.
All rise for the Honorable Patricia Cosgrove. You see it, folks? We heard today in reference to State of Ohio versus Kenneth Mills. Case number is CO 19-645266. We are conducting a sentencing hearing today. The defendant previously was found guilty of 2 counts of falsification and 2 counts of dereliction of duty. The court ordered a pre-sentence investigation. Both sides have filed sentencing memorandums. Is there any issue that either side wants to put on the record before we start here today? Representing the state of Ohio.
Not on behalf of the state, no, Your Honor.
Yes,
Okay.
Your Honor.
All right, well, let's go to sidebar. Where do we do our sidebars?
Right here.
You have to come over. Do you have equipment you can hear? You guys are behind the times. You know?
We have no waiting on you.
No, wait, no. No, we just stand up here. All right, that's a record.
state of Ohio regarding its position on sentencing. Then I'll hear from the defense. As I've indicated, I've read over these sentencing memorandums, the additional information given to the court today. Now consider anything that is said here today in reference to the sentencing. Prosecutor Matt Meyer, I should say Assistant Attorney General Matt Meyer, Dan Casares, and Linda Powers is here representing the state of Ohio. Representing the defendant is Attorney Kevin Spellacy, Jim McDonald, and Aaron Hansen. All right, so the state of Ohio may proceed at this juncture. What would you like the court to consider at this point?
Thank you, Your Honor. I will, may it please the court, Matthew Meyer on behalf of the state of Ohio. I will try to be brief and incorporate the arguments and statements made in the state of Ohio sentencing memorandum. Your Honor, the state's position and the state's argument is that Mr. Mills should be incarcerated, and we're asking for a maximum sentence of 9 months in jail. The state submits, well, let me put it this way. Many people have suggested to me that an appropriate sentence would be for Mr. Mills to endure the same kinds of conditions that inmates in his jail themselves endured. And what I mean by that is chronic overcrowding, understaffing, food that was over 2 years expired, having to serve time in a jail cell that's roughly 5 feet by 10 feet with another adult, and being locked in that cell for up to 24 hours a day in the red zoning conditions that inmates in that jail experience. Or, for instance, having to serve time in your street clothes in an area of the jail referred to as the dungeon, where there was no access to showers or potable water, where inmates had to drink water from an igloo cooler, sleeping on tables and on floors. Many people have suggested that Mr. Mills should be punished by having him receive the same kind of treatment that inmates in his jail suffered in inhumane conditions. The state's position, however, is that Mr. Mills should be given a lawful sentence and incarcerated in a facility that follows the law, that houses inmates safely and appropriately, and most important, lawfully. And that experience would be appropriate punishment for Mr. Mills to understand the harm that he inflicted first and foremost on the inmates who endured those conditions, but also on the corrections officers who were serving time essentially alongside of those inmates, who had to work up to 16 hours at a time in unbearable conditions. And you heard testimony at trial on how this affected the officers, how this affected their families. I was provided a statement prior to the sentencing hearing by Adam Chaluka, who testified, and he wanted the court to know, on behalf of the Ohio Patrolmen's Benevolent Association, member Cuyahoga County Corrections Officers, that this conviction and sentence does what limitations of our collective bargaining agreement and Ohio's collective bargaining laws could not. It gave us a forum to vocalize the many complaints and grievances of double, triple, and quadruple potting and dangerously low staffing levels of the jail during the Ken Mills era. Such conditions lead to unnecessary stress and burnout of our corrections officers, and that led to several unfortunate interactions with inmates, all of which could have been prevented had Mr. Mills just done his job. While we have a long way to go in undoing the damage he caused to the county jail, we hope whatever sentence this court imposes serves as a deterrent to current and future Cuyahoga County jail administrators and wardens. And that was Mr. Chaluka speaking on behalf of his members, the corrections officers who work in the Cuyahoga County Jail and worked under the Cuyahoga County Jail under Ken Mills. The conduct in this case can be characterized as indifference to the needs and the physical condition of the human beings who were housed in that jail. That indifference caused real harm. People suffered consequences. People suffered injuries. They dealt with incredibly difficult conditions as a result of the decisions that Mr. Mills made. And then when government got involved, when the Cuyahoga County Council held a hearing to put people on the spot, and appropriately so, to get answers about what was happening in that jail from the officials who were responsible for running it, what Mr. Mills did, what he decided to do, was to falsify the information that he knew. Council wanted to know whether the inmates' medical needs were being met, because there was a history of care and concern about just that issue in Cuyahoga County, where inmates had suffered serious harm as a result of substandard medical care. And Mr. Mills knew that he had been lobbying behind the scenes, that he was working the bureaucracy against the sheriff to prevent the hiring of nurses, because he wanted to keep costs down, because he wanted to please his boss, Armin Budish, because he wanted to be right. And so he lied to council. He told council that he hadn't obstructed the hiring of nurses, despite a paper trail showing that he had. He covered up his misconduct. And Cuyahoga County Council relied on that information to make decisions. Decisions about the budget for the county, about the policy goals for the county, about the legislation that would be passed that controlled the conduct of Cuyahoga County employees and how they went about the people's business. The sentence in this case should serve as a reminder to not just the officials who work in the jail, but to all the employees in Cuyahoga County, that they serve on behalf of the people. They do not serve themselves. It's in the people's name that they act. And Mr. Mills' conduct in this case showed that he was fundamentally interested in his own career, his own ambition, and his own ability to get things done for people who really just didn't understand the consequences of the decisions that they were making on the human lives who were being destroyed in this mill of profits where humans were ground up as grist. That was the Cuyahoga County Jail. It'll be suggested that nothing good has come of this and that cynically nothing will change. And I submit that that's wrong. If there's consequences, if there's a loss of liberty and freedom as a result of the criminal conduct in this case, real consequences, that will act as a deterrent, not just on wardens and jail administrators or county executives, but on any public official who chooses to misuse their power and harm other human beings. I have here with us in court today several victims and representatives of victims who have asked to speak on behalf of either themselves or loved ones who suffered harm as a result of the dereliction of duty in this case, and would ask with the court's leave that they be permitted to address the court. Ms. Fox? And Your Honor, the victim's representative who's with us today is the sister of Gregory Fox, who is an inmate. She has asked that her given name not be used other than her first name, which is Wendy.
Before I start reading this, I just want to say I don't have enough words. I'm so angry, and you don't have enough time to hear everything that just I have to say, let alone family members or other families. But with that being said, I was 2 years old when my brother Greg came into my life. That means there's not a day of my life I remember without him in it. That is not until August 30th, 2018. And that's when my brother left us. We lost him. He died while going through an absolute hell of living in Cuyahoga County's jail. Greg's ongoing mental health stress was stressed and pushed to a breaking point. He recognized that he needed help, and he did what we as a society preach to people with mental health needs. We say, ask for help. Tell someone you're struggling. Talk to somebody. Be consistent with your medication. Greg went to guards. He could not hold on. Greg hung himself in his cell on August 28th, 2018, and he died on August 30th, 2018, in the wee hours of the morning. When we lost Greg, my mother, my sister, and I, each individually became unwhole. Not only did I lose my brother, I lost part of my memory bank. I cannot go to him and say, how did Grandma make that recipe? Do you remember when this happened? This tragedy occurred? How do you can fill in the blank, anything. How do you, there are so many questions. It was supposed to be Greg, my sister, and myself who collectively took care of our mother as she ages. Together, plan together, make things happen together, help each other. One of the legs of our powerful triangle is gone. Instead, there's an empty hole instead of us being whole. I liken losing Greg to losing my hand, a part of myself. I can live without him. It's painful, and it changes the way I act, perform. But you learn a new normal, and then out of the blue, you go to wave your arm to reach out, to point, catch something that's falling, and you realize your hand is gone. It's no longer with you. Greg is no longer with me, and it won't ever be the same. Life will never be the same again. I'm angry, I'm hurt, disappointed, and brokenhearted that Greg suffered in the facility run by Cuyahoga County with individuals that were supposed to be smart, educated, hardworking, privileged. These people, such as Ken Mills, agreed to take on jobs and careers with a higher level of responsibility and risk. They agreed to work in government position of authority, and they chose to do that in return for a higher level of compensation, to serve a population in a county-run jail, people who are described as almost the direct opposite of themselves. These people who would be described as in poverty, underserved, underprivileged, uneducated, making the wrong choices, mentally ill, low IQs, addicted, the least of us. This man, Ken Mills, abused these people in the custody of his care by preventing them from adequate food, medical care, sanitary circumstances, and safety. Basic human rights. If this man, Ken Mills, is not responsible, who else is? And why are we not holding Ken Mills accountable to the fullest amount of his crimes? Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any other individual that wishes to speak?
Yes, Joseph Arpillo Jr.
Go ahead and say your name.
I'm speaking here today to convey the sense of irreparable loss I feel every day at the passing of my father now 3 years ago. Who he was to me, despite his flaws, and how senseless and avoidable the moments that led to his death truly were. While it pains me greatly to relive this, I felt it's necessary and really important for me to share these words today. Coming to terms with my father's death has been a challenging journey, to say the least. He was not your typical father figure, openly acknowledged that he had his faults. We had our ups and downs, periods being close and periods of estrangement. However, one thing has and always will be true. I love my father. Although his story is not mine to tell, there are parts that belong to me, moments that will always be part of me, moments that will forever define how he will be remembered. There's no doubt that getting to know my father presented challenges during periods of absence, resulting from his criminal activity. From periodic visits to the holidays, we always attempted to stay connected. When I look back on the past, I do not hold any grudges resulting from these times apart. Rather, I cherish these memories when our family could enjoy these rare but meaningful moments together, eating, laughing, enjoying each other's company. I'm fortunate enough to have a DVD with short cut compilations and capture those moments and remind me of how much I miss my father. One DVD to represent an entire lifetime cut short. My father was no saint, but when he experienced those rare, sober moments, he was full of life. He used to work as a mover, traveling cross country from one job to another, whether calling to let me know which part of the U.S. he was in, sending a new postcard, or even letting me join him on several trips. Those are the moments that I genuinely remember and will never forget. There was one trip we took driving through the mountains and red canyons of Utah. I will never forget those red mountains. It's a memory that I always remember him by. As we fast forward, my relationship with my father continued to ebbs and flow. I could go into details about actions and ramifications, but I recognize that no matter how many times I felt pain, anger, and sadness, those feelings do not make up for the loss that I feel today. No matter how many times I wanted to disconnect with my father, deep down inside, we always connected, and we knew that and I always looked forward to the future knowing that one day we would reconnect and be one happy family. Whether at my wedding, for the birth of my child, or even being there whether I needed someone to talk to, he could be there as my father. He had his fare of troubling times, but if there's one thing I've learned, it's that through his passing, he will and always be a part of me. I'm speaking here today because it's time to address the physical injuries, mental anguish, emotional distress, conscious pain, and suffering that led to my father's premature and preventable death and the impact it has on me. My father was one of 9 inmates who died in the Cuyahoga County Jail from June 2018 to May 2019. As Cleveland.com reads, for more than 2 hours, Joseph Aquila laid motionless on a mat inside the Cuyahoga County Jail before anyone bothered to check on him. An officer at one point walked up, kicked his mat, and walked away, leaving the 47-year-old inmate to sit another hour until another inmate alerted him. By the time he ended up at Metro Hospital, he was dead. He remained in a hunched-over position for 2.5 hours that restricted his ability to breathe, contributing to a slow, agonizing death. I've watched that video of my father multiple times over and over again. It's something that I will never forget. It's ingrained in my mind. And each time my heart breaks knowing that I see his clear and obvious pain that could have been prevented. I speak before the court this morning because my father deserved to receive better, more humane, and appropriate care. I speak before the court today because Kenneth Mill's acts of dereliction of duty were cruel, inhumane, and grossly negligent. I speak before the court today because his callous disregard for the inhumane conditions in the jail, the Cuyahoga County's understaffing, inmate overpopulation, and county's inhumane treatment of threats, physical violence, and deprivation of medical care are the reason why my father is not with us today. I no longer have a chance for my father to be a part of my life. The opportunity was cruelly, callously, and forever taken from me. There is no going back. Death is final. I will never see him again, never have a chance to say I forgive him, never have peace, never be at peace. My father will be remembered for those fleeting but fun memories that will always be a part of me. As he wrote in a letter in 2009, I want you to know that I love you with all my heart, Joey. You're constantly in my mind, and I think of you all the time. I realize I have not been the best dad in the world, but I love you. Again, I'm sorry, and I love you forever, plus a day. Remember that. I will remember that, Dad, and it's in his memory that I'm working to make his death mean something, to be an agent and change in a system that so desperately requires it. I'm sorry this happened to him. I'm sorry this happened to us. And I'm so sorry. And so should Kenneth Mills.
Thank you. I'm sorry, were you done or not done?
Not done yet.
Not done. Okay, that's fine.
I leave you with the poem by Jody Kushner, Father, as a reminder to hold on to the comfort of care of our loved ones provided during their presence on earth, and to open up to allow us to feel held by our loved ones when they're gone. It goes, forever my heart, always on my mind. Together we will be, all in God's time. Having gained another angel the day you left, eternity promises you Eternity promises you much needed rest. Rest now, Daddy, I'll be okay, as I carry with me every single day. I asked the court for Kenneth Mills to serve the maximum time and financial fines that are allowed to sentence him for the blatant disregard for my father's life. Thank you for letting me share my story of loss and hope. I hope for your empathy, attention, and action.
Thank you, sir.
Your Honor, after we came out, a victim's representative who stated that he represents Esteban Parra and Terrace DeBose asked for permission to make an oral statement on behalf of his clients. So I'm asking the court if it will permit that statement.
And I'm sorry, and who are these clients?
These were 2 inmates, one deceased and one living, who have stated they were harmed as a result of the acts of dereliction of duty.
And I'm sorry, what time frame are we talking about? And they were in the Cuyahoga County Jail?
Both inmates were in the Cuyahoga County Jail in 2018 during the time covered by the indictment. Mr. Parra died prior to Mr. Mills' resignation.
And who is here to speak on their behalf?
Attorney Paul Costello.
How do you spell your last name, sir?
Cristalloo.
Okay. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'd initially like to thank the state of Ohio for all of their hard work and their diligent pursuit of justice. My name is Paul Costello. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Terrence DeBose and the estate of Esteban Parra. Terrence DeBose, as some of the evidence came out during the Ken Mills trial, was an inmate in the Cuyahoga County Jail and was having a mental health crisis. He was in the midst of a mental health breakdown when he was strapped, both his arms and his legs, to a restraint chair. One of the guards who was in the restraint chair room with Mr. DeBose turned off his body cam. Of course, as we all know, as is online and has been shown in the media many times, the surveillance video was still running, and that video shows Mr. DeBose being beaten in his head and in his face by both of the corrections officers. Those officers were disciplined, terminated, and ultimately criminally charged. Esteban Parra, whose family I'm here on behalf of, in June of 2018, was brought to the Cuyahoga County Jail showing signs of intoxication, drug issues, and in the midst of a mental health crisis. He didn't receive the medical treatment that he so desperately needed. Rather, Mr. Parra was strapped to a restraint chair. He ultimately died as a result of the lack of care and medical attention that he desperately needed when he arrived at the county jail, objectively showing signs. Mr. Parra left behind 2 beautiful children and a loving family. What Mr. DeBose and what Mr. Parra's plight have in common is the same thing that the other victims who are here today, and many of the victims who aren't here today, or even named, or we may not even be aware of what they have in common. That the policies of short staffing, red zoning, inadequate medical care, these policies directly impacted people. They had an immediate and lasting effect on people's mental health, their physical health, and their lives. But more so, it was these policies that created a culture and a legacy of indifference and inhumanity. And you are hearing some of the consequences of that indifference and inhumanity. And you can look on the media and see hundreds of articles relative to this legacy of inhumanity. What was described in Mr. Mills's criminal trial was nothing less than accounts of an institution that should not be tolerated in a civilized society. This court should and must take into account the grave repercussions of the policies and the policy decisions that were intentionally made, policies which put money over human life. I want to again thank the state of Ohio, and I want to thank the court for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of Mr. DuBose and Mr. Parra, and so on behalf of them, I thank you again. Thank you.
Your Honor, I was asked to read a statement from a former inmate whose name is Chantel Glass, who was incarcerated in July 16th of 2018, and it was stated that she was harmed as a result of Mr. Mills' acts of dereliction of duty. Ms. Glass states, "I am a victim of Ken Mills' criminal mismanagement of the Cuyahoga County Jail. I'm a 32-year-old mother of 3 and a Cleveland resident. On July 16th, 2018, I was at my mother's house. We were trying to help my sister because she was threatening to kill herself. When the police arrived, supposedly to help, they ran my license and found that I had a 1-year-old traffic ticket. I had forgotten all about that ticket and didn't think it was a big deal. But the police arrested me and booked me into the Cuyahoga County Jail. This was just a few months into the Cleveland project, where Mr. Mills arranged to bring in Cleveland arrestees to the jail. After they checked me into the jail, I asked to make a phone call so I could make sure someone could watch my 3 kids. The officers told me no over and over again. One officer said that if I didn't stop asking for the phone, the officers would tie me down and mace me. I didn't think something like that could really happen, but it did. Corporal Idris Fareed Clark and Officer Robert Marsh made me get into a restraint chair, which is a chair where they strap you in so you can't move. I let them strap me into the chair, thinking maybe they would finally let me get my phone call. Then Officer Marsh reached his hand between my legs and I flinched. He responded by punching me in the head. Then Corporal Clark pepper sprayed me for what felt like forever. When I tried to turn my head because it hurt my eyes so much, he grabbed my hair and jerked my face forward so he could continue to spray me directly in the eyes. Several other officers were standing around watching this happen, and they didn't lift a finger to help me or even tell them to stop. It seemed like this was normal to them. Then Officer Clark splashed me with a little water in a closet and wheeled me into the medical dispensary. The nurse laughed and joked with the officers and did not get the burning chemicals off my face and body. I was wearing a white dress that became wet from the water and hitched up around my hips in the chair. The officers and nurse did nothing to protect my modesty or prevent male staff and inmates from viewing my exposed body as they wheeled me around in the chair. They made me sit for hours in a cold room, tied in the chair, covered in pepper spray. I couldn't see. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die. Even once they let me out of the chair, I was left in my street clothes and denied a shower for the entire time I was there, 2 days. And all because I got hauled into the county jail for an old traffic ticket. Ken Mills' crimes affected real people in our community like me. I'm an average mom who wasn't doing anything wrong when I got arrested. I had no idea that our county ran a jail where the officers would torture people for asking to use the phone. I was at the mercy of people who did not see me as a human being. How Mr. Mills ran the jail is the reason the corrections staff felt free to hurt me despite being on camera the whole time. This was the culture he created. I asked the court to please hold Ken Mills accountable for what he did to me, to other people, and to our community. If it happened to me, it could have happened to anyone who forgot about an old ticket. Ken Mills endangered all of us. Please sentence Mr. Mills to serve time in the Cuyahoga County Jail. I can think of no more fitting punishment for Mr. Mills than to have to sit alone in a room in the jail he so terribly ran. Chantel Glass, October 6, 2021.
The officers involved in that incident, were they ultimately prosecuted?
Yes, Your Honor. Corporal Idris Fareed Clark was prosecuted by Mr. Caceres and Ms. Powers and I, as was Officer Marsh. Officer Marsh did testify in this case, and he gave an explanation of having been held accountable for that incident. In conclusion, Your Honor, I'd just like to quote from a writing that was provided to me by Gary Brock, who's a witness in this case. He lost his job after he stepped forward publicly and tried to prevent some of the harms that happened as a result of the defendant's acts of dereliction of duty and falsification. Mr. Mills' dereliction of duty and obstructive behaviors contributed to a demise of healthcare services, which led to horrific deprivation of basic rights for the most vulnerable in our society. Ken Mills needs to be held accountable with a sentence reflecting the severity of the harm he has inflicted on so many vulnerable people. And given all of the public officials who indulged Mills' misconduct, did nothing, or enabled or empowered him, Mills' sentence needs to deter those officials from even thinking about behaving in a similar fashion ever again. The state of Ohio agrees with Mr. Brock and incorporates his remarks as part of our sentencing presentation to the court. I appreciate the court's time and patience throughout this process and would reiterate the state's prayer that Mr. Mills receive a 9-month sentence in the county jail. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Meyer. I'll now hear from the defense, Attorney Kevin Spells.
Thank you, Judge. Judge, hardly can anybody agree that somebody should be strapped in a chair and subjected to the kind of conduct that was described in that letter. But the hypocrisy is that in that letter, the nurse, Mr. Brock's colleague, is the one laughing at her, right? The same person that he portrays to be, you know, the medical people were somehow left out of the equation in the jail. In that instance, they're there laughing allegedly at this person. That's the problem with this case in general, the hollowness, if you will, Your Honor, of the case. You know, I've said it before, and I'll say it again, and I'll say it till I'm gone. Where's the sheriff? Where's George Taylor? The hypocrisy of somehow my client goes to counsel and is charged and convicted of a falsehood, which I don't know which one as of yet. But be that as it may, we have a councilman who comes to court and clearly perjures himself. We know that, and it's clear in the record. It's in transcript. I didn't see Cliff Pigney until the end. Cliff Pigney told the government on at least 2 occasions that he met with him beforehand, part of the alleged so-called, and I hate to even talk about it at this point, barbecue, right? I mean, so this case is riddled with hypocrisy. And the young lawyer who can talk out of both sides of his mouth and suggest to this court in a letter delivered to Mr. Meyer today that, I think his name's Chalupka, that somehow he represents an institution that was victimized by this is ludicrous, because to my face and to my colleagues' faces, he says nothing has changed since before Mills, during Mills, or after Mills. And as I said, Judge, during the trial and in my close, the alarm, if there was an alarm, it was rang, right? It was pulled. And the folks on 9th Street did nothing. Judge, there's very little that I can say that would ever satisfy any of the folks sitting behind me. I would simply ask you to take a look at the letters and the memorandum that we wrote, look at my client's history, and I trust you'll do what you think is just and fair in this case as it relates to any potential punishment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spells. I'll hear from Mr. Mills. Is there anything you want to say, sir, prior to the imposition of sentence in this case?
No, thank you, Judge.
The court has, as I previously indicated, I have considered the sentencing memorandums, which are excellent on both sides, all of the letters written by the quarters of Mr. Mills. Some of them worked with him in the Coast Guard. A few of them were neighbors, some of them worked with him in the jail. I have listened to the statements made by the attorneys here today on both sides and the victim statements. Now, I do want to say a couple clarification things. The defense had objected to the statements made by victims saying that it was the defense position that, quote, they were not victims. However, Article 1, Section 10 of the Ohio Constitution, known as Marcy's Law, defines a victim in very broad terms. Section D states, as used in this section, victim means a person against whom the criminal offense or delinquent act is committed or who is directly and proximately harmed by the commission of the offense or act. And that is why the court allowed information in specifically regarding the conditions suffered by the inmates. Now, having said that, and I made this crystal clear during the trial, defendant is not charged with causing any death of any particular inmate in the Cuyahoga County Jail. The actions contributed to an atmosphere, if you will, of indifference. All right, first of all, I want to talk about merger. Both sides agree on the merger issues here. He was convicted of 2 counts of falsification, 2 counts of dereliction of duty. The court at this time merges count 2, falsification, into count 3, which is also falsification and misdemeanor in the first degree. And the court will sentence on count 3. Count 4 and 5 are dereliction of duty. These are misdemeanors of the second degree, and the court will merge count 4 into count 5. Also dereliction of duty charge for the negligent failure to observe any law enforcement, lawful or reasonable regulation that would create an unsafe condition. Now, no man or no person is all good or all bad. Obviously, Mr. Mills has some good in his background. The letters indicate that. Every person I've ever sentenced in my career, the first opinion of people that have known him is that this can't be true, or he couldn't have done this, or there's mitigating things. I don't care if you're a murderer or you're in on an F5 or a misdemeanor. So nobody's all good or all bad, and this goes to the defendant. One of the things that I guess struck me is that when I think of public service, it is a privilege. It's a privilege to serve the people of the state of Ohio and the citizens of Cuyahoga County. The descriptions of the conditions in the jail were horrific, which I'll talk about some of the salient points in just a moment. But these prisoners have 2 things in common. One is 99% of them are awaiting trial. In other words, they haven't been sentenced, they're innocent until proven guilty. The other thing is they are human beings. Whether or not they are charged with the most grievous crimes, murder, rape, robbery, or a low-level drug offense, they're still human beings. And they are entitled to be sentenced to a facility that has clean water, running water, in this case, unsanitary conditions. You know, we're the United States of America. We're not a third world country. We don't treat other human beings like this, like they were treated in the Summit County, or I'm sorry, in the Cuyahoga County Jail. Now, some of the things the court has looked at, and I do want to also indicate that for purposes of misdemeanor sentencing, the court has considered the principles and purposes of sentencing delineated in revised code section 292921. The overriding purposes of misdemeanor sentencing is to protect the public from future crime by the offender and others, and to punish the offender. The considerations the court needs to take into consideration whether or not the defendant can be rehabilitated, the impact of the crime, and hand down a sentence that is commensurate with and not demeaning to the seriousness of the crime for similar offenses committed by similar offenders. Quite frankly, there isn't a lot of case law on people who are jail administrators committing or being charged with negligent supervision and lying to county council. There just is a dearth of case law. I've also considered revised code section 292922, and I am required to consider the appropriateness for misdemeanor sentencing. And in doing so, I have to consider the nature and circumstances of the offense, also the things brought forward by defense that are in his favor, such as whether or not he's likely to recidivate or his military service, and any other factors consistent with the purposes and principles of sentencing. I want to say from the onset, I have considered, as required by law, imposing a period of community control sanctions or a combination of jail and community control sanctions. However, the court feels to do so would not meet the purposes of misdemeanor sentencing and would demean the seriousness of the offense. Now, some of the things that the court heard in the week-and-a-half trial, and these offenses of falsification and dereliction of duty are intertwined. The court heard about double potting of inmates, red zoning, officers to be held over in 16-hour shifts. In other words, they work their 8 hours and they're told to work another 8 hours. When asked about this by the state examiner, the defendant said, well, the reason we do this is because of the frequent call-ups. Well, the frequent call-ups are because the deputies are required without notice to work 16 hours and they're exhausted. And I agree to this extent with what defense said. The conditions in the Cuyahoga County Jail have always been serious. But what happened here was that because of the regionalization push, taking Cleveland inmates, taking Euclid inmates, that bad situation was elevated to an unsafe, unsanitary, unhealthy environment. And there's nobody else to blame but this defendant. Now, in going over the testimony here, it's true the statutory duties of the sheriff are one thing. In reality, the actual duties of the sheriff are different. The statute permits the sheriff to appoint an administrator. Sheriff Pickney testified he, in essence, was the middleman, that Ken Mills went continuously around him, and even at one time recommended to Armin Budish that he be fired, which fell on deaf ears. He had indicated, many witnesses testified that as the director of regional corrections, the jail administrator, he was in charge of the jail. In fact, there's testimony from Gary Brock that the defendant told him not to listen to Marcus Harris, who was in charge of the nursing staff, and quote, I, meaning Ken Mills, I run the jail. The harm to the inmates, and they are victims under this broad definition here, are as follows. First of all, when they come in, the inmates are subject to a very short questionnaire. But then they're supposed to go into a 20-minute, half an hour evaluation of mental health, physical health, danger to themselves, suicide, or whether or not they present a risk to others. And instead, all of these people are put together in general population till they can get around to it because they don't have enough nurses. And when specifically asked and testified or said in county council, you know, we have enough staff to handle everything. Yes, he did do a memo saying not to hire additional nurses. Then later other people joined in because he represented, well, let's just do it all at one time, hiring all of these people. So they are laying, according to the testimony of Ms. Woods, they're laying, during her inspections, the inmates are laying on the floor, on mats, including pregnant women. There's no running water. There's no showers. She observed grease in the kitchen, rat feces in the facility, and no clean drinking water for these people except from an igloo container. As I said, this is the United States of America. It's not a third world country. There is no excuse to treat other human beings in this manner. And then to go in front of county council and say, hey, everything's all right. I don't go around people. We got enough staff. We got plenty of nurses. There's no problem. I don't try to go around people. So these people went without a full health screening sometimes for days. Meanwhile, they had serious things such as diabetes, heart disease, suicide, mental health. All of these things, they are put together in one manner and in this inhumane condition. I want to talk about the red zoning, and yes, red zoning has been an issue for a long time. I don't have the figures in front of me right now, but the red zoning during 2017 and 2018. 2018, after the regionalization plan took place, there was almost 4,000 inmates red zone. If you go back the year before, there was like about 600 or 1,000 less. You go back and less and less and less. 17 and 18, it jumped dramatically. So these people are red zone. There's not enough deputies. They're working overtime, and they can't even see. According to the evidence at trial, there's portions of the jail a single officer cannot see. And how do you monitor prisoners who have serious health conditions, maybe who are dying, who are on the floor, who are pregnant, who have diabetes? How do you make sure they get the medical treatment that they need? And these people had to wait for these basic human needs, which we take for granted, and we take for granted that even the least of us, but for the grace of God go I, are treated. All right, Mr. Mills, I want you to come forward, please, to the podium here. All right, is there anything at this time you want to say to the court prior to sentencing?
No, ma'am.
All right, the court at this time, in reference to count 3, the first count of falsification, for making false statements with the intent to mislead a public official, as was testified to in the trial. Public officials rely on information, accurate information given to them so they know how to properly staff an agency. That is a misdemeanor of the first degree. The court is going to sentence you to 6 months in the Cuyahoga County Jail. In reference to count 5, dereliction of duty, that is a misdemeanor of the second degree. The court is going to impose a sentence of 90 days in the Cuyahoga County Jail. The court is going to order those sentences run consecutively and not concurrently. pursuant to revised code section 292922, the court finds that the longest jail term is necessary in this case for the reasons I've already indicated, and this is the worst form, one of the worst forms of these offenses. For the reasons I've indicated, and the harm to these inmates who are still human beings, no matter what they're charged with, it cannot be calculated. The damage to the reputation of Cuyahoga County and even the correction officers cannot be underestimated. What you have done is unthinkable, it's callous, it's indifference. I don't know how you can live with yourself, look at yourself in the mirror. The court finds that consecutive sentences are necessary to deter others in similar positions of authority from committing similar crimes. You have the right to appeal your conviction in the sentence if you cannot afford an attorney to represent you. The court will appoint an attorney to represent you for purposes of appeal. If you cannot afford counsel, the court will appoint counsel to represent you for purposes of the appeal. Do you understand your appellate rights as the court has given them to you? And this attorney then would be required to file a notice of appeal within 30 days of sentencing. Do you understand the appellate rights that the court has just given you?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, do you wish to appeal your conviction?
Yes, Judge.
Attorney Spelcy, are you going to continue to represent Mr. Mills for purposes of the appeal?
For perfecting the appeal, yes, Judge. I don't know if I'll actually handle the appeal, but for the purpose of perfecting the appeal, yes. And on that note, Judge, I'd respectfully ask the court to consider at this point staying the execution of sentence and allowing us to have our appellate body.
All right, the court at this time indicates today's the day of sentencing. I am not going to grant that motion. He has been convicted now and sentenced. The court will deny that. You can obviously go to the 8th Appellate District and
Understood.
request a appellate bond from them.
Thank you.
That's all.
Your Honor, may I make one statement? I misspoke as to the timing of Mr. DeBose's conviction. I would ask the court to disregard that Marcy's law statement. That was after Mr. DeBose was acted.
I didn't consider it anyway.
Thank you.
All right, so, all right, that's fine. All right, we'll take them to that. Thank you, Your Honor. All right, thank you, and I hope
Thank you, Judge.
I hope you feel better. Yeah. Yeah, don't break any more bones. How you doing?
She's gonna stay away from that, so she's gonna be fine.
Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you, Judge. We approach you well.
Yeah, you're, yeah.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah. How are you?
Hey, Tanner.
Had to drive up here, my God. Yeah, I know, well.
I want to ask you a minute. Judge, as it relates to